This episode brought to you by Cafe Imports, Minneapolis-based importers of fine specialty green coffees. Independently owned and operated since 1993, Cafe Imports has been dedicated to decreasing its impact on the earth through renewable energy, carbon neutrality, and by supporting conservational efforts in places where quality coffee is grown and also where quality coffee is consumed. Where does your coffee come from?
And by the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation. As a nonprofit, we rely on support from listeners like you. If you like what you hear, please consider a donation. To learn more and make a gift, visit us at www.gosuperior.org.
Welcome to the Lake Superior Podcast. I'm Walt, Lindala.
And I'm Frida, Waara. We are made stronger by story, and there's no better source than the continent's largest body of fresh water, Lake Superior.
So join us as we highlight the 5 national parks that ring this greatest of the Great Lakes, meet the people, tour the places, and learn about the projects that make these parks and body of water so remarkable.
This podcast made possible with the support of the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation and Media Brew Communications.
I'm Walt Lindala.
And I'm Frida, Waara.
Welcome once again to the Lake Superior Podcast. Today, Frida, somebody that's, for us, not actually too far away from us along the big lake, but some interesting stuff coming up here in the next little bit.
Well, I have to tell you that I was listening to a podcast from Outside Magazine about the climbing rangers that were doing some rescues at Mount Rainier. And it got me thinking, who are our rescue rangers? Do we have a climbing rescue ranger in our parks? And sure as shooting, when you know about Pictured Rocks, and for all those folks who have visited Pictured Rocks, they know whether you're on the water, you're on a trail, you're along the cliffs, whatever it might be, and all season long, because that's our park that is open summer, fall, winter, and spring. And we get a chance to talk to Chief Ranger there, Joe Hughes.
Hey, Joe, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Happy to have you here. Let's talk a little bit about you. Just a bit of a background for folks. How did your life end up getting you to Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore?
Well, I've been with the National Park Service here for about 16 years. I grew up in downstate Michigan, and I always loved being outside. I always loved, fishing and riding my bike as a kid. And when I got older, I started working for the Michigan DNR in the Higgins Lake area. And as I got older, I just noticed my area of patrol started getting larger and larger. And I met some friends that were park rangers. And when it was in my early 20s, and I said, that sounds great. And I put myself through our seasonal law enforcement academy that the Park Service has. And I applied to 105 jobs that first year, and I heard back from 2. Wow. And so I took the first offer that I got, which was at Pinnacles National Monument, which is a small volcanic park, climbing park in California. And that was my first summer job with the National Park Service at 24 years old. Mm-hmm. And then I applied and got a job at the Smoky Mountains, so I worked there for the winter. So I kind of went from a backcountry climbing park to kind of a highway patrol front country park. And then next summer I did boating. So I was a boating ranger at Lake Powell in Arizona. And I got my first permanent job in Yosemite Valley, where I worked in the jail. It's pretty unique. There's only 2 national parks that actually have jails in them. So
yeah, you catch my attention right there. I won't even think of that, but I
never knew there was a jail.
That's unique.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you think about, the size of Yellowstone or the size of Yosemite, and all those people come in there, they typically come with all their problems too, and sometimes people end up having to go to jail for the night. So that was my first permanent job, was a jailer in Yosemite Valley, and I loved it there. And after that, I worked for the Fish and Wildlife for a little while as a game warden in Lower Michigan in Saginaw at the Shiawassee National Refuge there. And my wife and I were kind of itching to get back west, so I went to White Sands. I worked there for a little bit.
And then from there, you ended up at the Grand Canyon, correct?
Yeah, at the Grand Canyon, yeah. I worked on the south rim of the Grand Canyon, promoted to a supervisor there on shift. working night shift there. And then my first chief job was down in Cumberland Island in Georgia. And then I was lucky enough to get back to Michigan, where I'm from. So it's been kind of a whirlwind tour. I got a lot of experience, a lot of different things that I did, promoted a couple times, but I love Pictured Rocks. I love this area. This is kind of near where I grew up, and this is where I'm going to be raising my kids, and here's hoping I end up retiring here.
Well, here's the thing that I'm hearing from you right off the bat here is you've moved around a lot, and you've been to a lot of different places, a lot of different parks, a lot of different responsibilities, which has been real interesting. But there's one thing I'm hearing in particular is that you've been from place to place. You now like it here at Pictured Rocks, and this is really where you'd like to set up shop. But how does it compare? How is it different to, let's say, Yosemite or the Grand Canyon? Maybe some things that are even similar.
Oh, absolutely. One thing you probably noticed from all the different jobs I've had is the one thing I love about being a park ranger is we kind of get to do it all. I joke that we're kind of the best deal you're going to find in the government, because the park rangers are law enforcement officers. We do search and rescue. We do emergency medical service. We're all EMTs. We do wildland fire, structure fire. We run our boat. And then in the case of the chief ranger, I also do special park use permits and commercial use permits, that kind of stuff. So I like the breadth of duties that I get to do, which means you always find something different to do, and you kind of got to be good at it all. And at a big park like Yosemite or Grand Canyon, there's usually a lot of help, right? You got hundreds of employees,
sure,
and you can really specialize. So some rangers will just be climbing rangers, or some will just be the law enforcement guys and gals. Some will be the the folks that just focus on the commercial permits or specifically for search and rescue. But here at a small park, I've got a team of 6 this summer plus myself, and we've kind of got to do it all. So for us, smaller staff, we really need to train kind of the most likely scenarios and practice most likely scenarios and just prepare and be ready kind of for everything, which I like.
Talk about Pictured Rocks, too. We're talking about a 42-mile stretch of waterfront that is not, there's a few beaches along there, but just give our listeners an idea of what it is that you're patrolling.
Yeah, so 42 miles of lakeshore, probably about 12 miles of cliffs interspersed with different sand beaches. And then we have a big, long 12-mile beach. That's actually what we call it, a 12-mile beach. We have a federally designated wilderness area inside the core area of the park. And then as you head further east, we've got large sand dunes, just like Sleepy Bear Dunes. We've got a big perched dune field and kind of like a wilderness study area over there in Grand Sable. And then you get into Grand Marais. So that whole stretch is about 42 miles, and there's interspersed with all kinds of cool beaches and cliffs, waterfalls. My favorite waterfall is Spray Falls. It just falls right off the cliff face. It's a gigantic waterfall. It's pretty cool, right in the Lake Superior. So that's kind of the gist of the park. You were asking about kind of what's been going on recently, if you want me to touch on that.
You've had a boatload,
yeah,
so to speak.
Well, yeah, we were going to try to record last week, and I got busy on a call. So here's just the kind of the notes of what we've been going to the last few weeks. We had just yesterday we had a wildland fire at Kingston Lake, which is about a mile from our park boundary, and we responded to that, and that was interesting because we went with the Michigan DNR, and they didn't have a boat with them. So we brought our little science boat that we use to do some science work in the park. We brought that over to get the wildland firefighters out to the island. So our guys are working that, and that fire's out right now. But then we had some kayakers that were seasick, and one of them went into convulsions, and we got that call while we were on the water. We had another boat that was dead in the water. We had a couple suicidal subjects that came to the park, unfortunately, but we were able to find them and get them help. So kudos to my rangers for tracking those folks down.
I'm just jump in right here, Joe. So far in these few moments that we've had, what caught my ear, first of all, was when you referenced that you had law enforcement training, which for some reason I understand why you would. But from my perspective, when you think about rangers and things like that, this is probably wrong, and this is probably naivete on my part, but I think about, like, with rangers, they are there to help people with things like you're talking about, maybe give them some directions and things like that. But then you mentioned you worked in the jail and you worked in that sort of thing. There is a real component to what you're telling us here today that's opened my eyes a little bit in terms of the responsibilities of the rangers, the staff, everybody, because you just covered a whole gamut of things, and that's really just the summer months. We can get into winter here in just a little bit, but was that something that, as this career evolved for you, was a surprise, or did you know about it? I mean, because it's surprising me.
Oh yeah, I mean, I knew going in that this was a law enforcement job. All of us park rangers are federal law enforcement officers. We get our commissions from, unlike a sheriff or a governor, with the state police, we get our commissions from Washington D.C.
Mm-hmm.
And we work for the National Park Service under the Secretary of the Interior. So we're all federal law enforcement officers. We're all trained to, make arrests, write tickets, use handcuffs, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that's not the primary part of our job. There's a lot of other things that we do too, but we're all trained up and very efficient and proficient, at those different types of jobs, especially the law enforcement area, because you kind of can't do that just a little bit. You got to be all in, So, our day-to-day, all of us have duty belts on. We look just like a regular police officer, but then a lot of times we have to transition into other things.
Well, one of those things would be rescues, and we did want to ask you about water rescues and what makes those so particularly tough. And can you share a couple of them maybe to give our listeners an idea of what the challenge is when you have to go out on a water rescue?
Oh, absolutely. I think the biggest thing is, and you guys know this, you're from the area, Lake Superior never really warms up, right?
Right.
Right. At best, 65 degrees maybe?
And that's luxurious for us up here, to be honest.
Yeah. So, when it comes to folks getting into trouble on the water, they don't have a lot of time because it's cold water. So if you're not prepared for the cold water, that could be an issue. The biggest thing that makes it tough for us is distance. The park's 42 miles wide. Lake Superior is to Canada, 100 miles across, something like that, or even further. So, depending on which way the wind's going, the wave's going, and if a kayaker got away from the cliff edges, they could really get into trouble quickly. Unfortunately, at the park, and I looked back many years, decades, we average someone perishing in the park on average about every other year. Some years there's nobody, and then some years we'll get a couple.
Right.
We've had some of the other kayak rescues we had. I'm thinking of one. Couple. This was 2021, which was our peak year at the park. We closed in on almost 1.3 million visitors.
Wow.
At Pictured Rocks. And to kind of put that in perspective, I think Isle Royal gets about 25,000 a year.
Yep.
Something like that.
Yeah.
And so we're up there with Sleeping Bear or Indiana Dunes with visitation quite a bit. And so we have people that come from all over. And this guy was kayaking. He was a very experienced kayaker and on Lake Michigan. But he came up here, and the wind shifted, and he started taking some waves, and his boat flipped, and he wasn't able to get back into his boat. So he's out, along the cliff edge, not able to get back into his boat in cold water. It was early spring, so probably 45-degree water.
Jeez.
And luckily, somebody had saw him and called 911 and said, hey, there's somebody in distress. And by the time the Rangers and myself got there, we threw him a rope bag to try to pull him in, and we said, let go of your kayak. And he wouldn't let go of his kayak. He was, he had already kind of started to succumb to the cold water, and he couldn't get himself back into the boat when we got him over to us. So we had to lift and pull him in, and his legs were kind of locked up. He couldn't really swim anymore, and that boat was what was keeping him afloat. And we started bringing him in to the ambulance. And on the way, I told one of my rangers, hey, interview this guy. Let's figure out who he is and his name and everything. And after about 10 minutes, my poor ranger, he was a brand new guy, said, I don't think that guy's all there. I'm like, what are you talking about? And I looked at him, and yeah, he wasn't all there. He was close to succumbing to hypothermia from being in the water. and we just needed to get him warmed back up. And he made a full recovery, but luckily we were close by and were able to get there quickly to him. So that's a story that had a good ending.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, sometimes we have stories that have bad endings.
Of course. We're talking with Joe Hughes today. He is Chief Ranger, Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore here on the Lake Superior podcast. And, Frida, so far there's been some very interesting particular stories here. But, as we're talking with Joe here, it really strikes me that it's important to be aware of the big lake. We talk about it here all the time on the program, and that's something to keep in mind.
Well, right away, when you were telling the story, Joe, in my head, I usually go by whenever at sea, no less than 3, to have 3 paddlers, because if someone goes over, you've got someone that can go to get that paddle and someone else who can rescue the boat, get that person back in, because that is your salvation. If you don't have your own self-rescue down, you should not be out on Lake Superior alone. And certainly we don't understand what that cold water, it really does just shock your system. And the older I get, the more I go, well, boy, I'm lucky I didn't have a heart attack, when you hit that cold water too. But, another thing, we've seen bigger boats also with an issue. And most recently, we have a sailboat that caught fire just weeks ago.
Oh, yeah. Actually, when we were going to record this last week, I texted you and said, hey, I've got to go. We have a rescue going on. And I apologize. But what that turned out to be was a 30-foot cabin cruiser that caught fire along Pictured Rocks. Mm-hmm. We don't know what caused it, but that vessel had 5 individuals on board. And luckily, the Coast Guard stationed out of Marquette was in the area. They were training some new folks on their boat, and they saw this vessel in distress with white smoke coming off of it, and they were able to rescue those 5 individuals. They were actually there on scene, which was really great. Otherwise, those people probably would have had to abandon ship.
Mm-hmm. And when I was
thinking, go ahead.
Didn't mean to interrupt, but abandoning ship when you're that close to the cliffs. I mean, the ship could also have been taken into the cliffs and just, pummeled as well, but it's not like you could walk to a beach.
Well, that's the big thing, is that once you get along the cliff edge, there's no way out. You've got to get to another beach, which could be miles ahead of you or miles behind you. Or if the wind shifts to the northwest, the waves are just going to, pound your vessel right up against the cliff.
Right.
And so if you're in an unmotorized vessel, you've got to be strong enough to get yourself away from the cliffs. And unfortunately, this motorized vessel caught fire. By the time the Rangers had gotten there, that white smoke had turned to black as 150 gallons of diesel fuel lit up. Whoa. And the whole boat burned right down to the waterline.
Yeah.
Wow.
Now, at least everybody was able to get off of that one. Now, you're talking, of course, being out on the water. That means when we get into the winter months, this stuff is going to turn into snow and it's going to turn into ice. And the Pictured Rocks does not close for winter. So let's talk a little bit about that in terms of the challenges, some of the things that you address, perhaps a rescue, but at least with getting people aware with what they might be getting into if they are going to head out there. I mean, the winter creates an entire new animal, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah, for sure. We pull the boat and get out the snowmobiles when the wintertime comes. One thing I really like about Pictured Rocks is the entire park, except for Sandpoint Road, our main headquarters road out of Munising, every single road turns into a state-groomed snowmobile trail. So it's kind of unique for a national park. The whole place, you can't drive anywhere. You've got to snowmobile to get through the park, or ski or snowshoe. And so in the winter months, one of our main user groups at the park are ice climbers. So all those big, beautiful cliffs that are seeping water or waterfalls, all of that freezes, and the park kind of becomes a mecca for ice climbers. And so these are folks that, instead of climbing rock, they have ice axes and ropes, and they climb icicles. So we've slowly become kind of a mecca for this community. It's actually really easy to access our ice here at Pictured Rocks. A lot of it you can just snowmobile to, drive to. It's pretty quick to get to. And so we've got a lot of folks that do that. So on the ranger side of things, that's one. When I got here 6 years ago, there was one capability that the Rangers didn't have, and that was ice rescue with ropes along Pictured Rocks. And so for the last 6 years, we've been training and partnering with the other commercial guiding services in town. And a lot of those folks are fully integrated with our park rangers. And so the park rangers kind of take the role as the incident command, the incident, and we gather resources and we get people from point A to point B. And we do a little bit of the rescuing, but we kind of rely on these alpine mountaineers to do the really technical work.
So is this where what the high angle rescue team is? I mean, can you tell us about that a little bit?
Yeah. So when I first got here during Michigan Ice Fest, which is the second week of February, we have in February about 15,000 people come to the park and ice climb or look at people ice climb. We get pretty busy in the deep winter, and the group that puts on Michigan Ice Fest, they put together their own kind of rescue team just in case somebody gets hurt. And they had an incident happen and were a little bit on the less prepared side. And after that, they said, we need to get this squared away. And so they put together their own rescue team. And when I got here, I said, well, why don't we just partner together? So that's what we did. So all of the high angle rescue, the Superior High Angle Rescue Professionals is what they're called, and they're associated with Michigan Ice Fest, and they have all done extra training. And when emergencies happen in the park, they actually become employees of the Park Service for the duration of the incident, and they help me do these more technical rescues along the lakeshore.
We're talking with Joe Hughes, who is Chief Ranger, pictured Rocks National Lakeshore on the Lake Superior podcast.
Joe, share with us, just the listeners might not have a feel for Spray Falls, the most beautiful. Oh my gosh, the way that it just falls over the cliffs. It's sought after for folks that want to go there and climb there, but that's not an easy spot to get to begin with. And what if there needed to be a rescue there? Just give us a little bit of that scenario.
Yeah, well, I kind of talked before is I like to train for most likely things that would happen in the park. So we like to look at what are the rescues that are happening, and then we kind of train to practice those. And one that we practice every year is going out to Spray Falls. So Spray Falls is in the middle of the park. It's very remote, even in the summertime. But in the wintertime, what myself and the rangers and the folks on the rescue team will do is we will do kind of a mock rescue out at Spray Falls right before Ice Fest. And so we'll go out, and just to get to that area, we have to get all of our snowmobile gear, and we snowmobile about 2 hours into the park. A lot of it is off trail. So we're on like old logging roads and areas that have been cleared, before it was even a park, to kind of access the area. To be honest, I need a GPS to kind of find my way into there. That's why we practice it every year. It's really tough to kind of find your way through the woods. And so it's a 2-hour snowmobile ride, and then we drop our snowmobiles off, and we get out our snowshoes, and we snowshoe another hour into the location, and then we're at Spray Falls. And then we've got to get out our climbing gear, and we'll rappel down Spray Falls, which is a frozen icicle, and we'll climb back out. And that kind of simulates, us getting to the area with all of our climbing gear and doing a rescue. And then we've got to snowshoe back out an hour, and then snowmobile back out 2 hours. So even without the stress of an incident happening, it's a good 6 to 8 hour approach just to get there and to get back, not just to rescue someone. So
I'm not kind of snickering here in the background.
Walt's I'm just sign up.
I'm just exhausted listening to you talk about it. But that's the importance of the training.
And I want to add one other piece to this, that you're talking about doing this at about 47 degrees latitude. And so the second week of February, you have at most about 9 hours of daylight. I'm not exactly sure. I don't have the calculation, but you're going to have sunrise at 8. You're going to have sunset about 7. And when you think about you want to put some climbing time in there in the middle, you better also be prepared to have your headlamps.
Yeah.
Or to spend a night in the woods, which, you can do that. Absolutely. But how many people go prepared for that?
So the question that comes up, Joe, is which season is the toughest? I mean, is it summer? Is it winter? And why is one of them, or are they both challenging in their own ways?
You're asking Joe for a challenge. He loves it all.
What do you think, Joe? I mean, what season?
I do love my job, but I would say the hardest season is probably summer, just because the volume of calls.
Sure. Okay.
Just in the last 2 weeks, we've had a myriad of law enforcement, search and rescue, and boat, and all kinds of different calls. And, we end up working, some of my rangers will gently mention, hey, boss, I haven't had a day off in a few weeks. And I said, oh, no, we've been so busy. Mm-hmm. And so about this time of year, I usually sit down with my rangers and we all take a good check on each other. And how are we doing? Do we need some time off? For those of us with families, summer's tough. You're trying to fit in a lot of stuff, and you've got, we work in 10, 12-hour days or more. And so summer is probably the hardest just because the calls come back to back to back, and you don't get a lot of break. Now, in the wintertime, when we do get a call, it's serious, and it gets serious really fast.
Yeah, cold can make that serious, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, cold makes the calls really serious really fast, but they're not so back to back, so we have a little bit more time to plan. So I would say the toughest season is probably summer, just because you got so much going on.
Joe, give us a profile of the people. You've got 6 folks on your team. Does that include you?
No, I'm the 7th as the chief ranger. So we've got a mix of permanent and seasonal workers. Some work year-round, some work just in the summer. When I kind of explained my experience, I was jumping around there, and that was seasonal work. You work 6 months at a park that's busy in the summer and 6 months at a park that's busy in the winter. So we've got a mix of 6 folks plus myself, so 7. And, I'm really proud of my team. I've got a lot of former veterans on our team. We have a former Coast Guard helicopter pilot that's working for us this summer. Another former Coast Guard rescue swimmer. So those 2 individuals come with just a wealth of rescue experience. I mean, these are the people that are flying into hurricanes to rescue people,
Right.
And so they bring a lot to the table here. I've got a couple avionics folks, Air Force Master Sergeant that's on our shift here with thousands of hours of flight time. Another Marine avionics guy who's got a great experience in the military. One guy that was in the United States Army, and then we've got 2 Michigan kids, and that's me and another guy from Bay City. Mm-hmm. And we didn't join the military, but we joined the park rangers when we were really young. So,
yeah. Well, you've been talking about you've had 6 years at Pictured Rocks, and you're proud of your team and you're proud of how you handle these. What is Joe Hughes, the chief ranger at Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore? What is he the most proud of? What do you look back on so far on your tenure?
Here at Pictured Rocks, probably, our team culture. I mean, we've got a lot of stuff going on here at the park, and but we've got a crew that's highly motivated, driven, hardworking. They're police officers who are kind and caring, and we really want what's best for people. We want everybody to be safe. And I take a lot of pride in the way we, deal with the public and the way that we are prepared to deal with rescues at the park. So that's something that I'm most proud of.
Wow. Really and that means so much because when you look at what the park's all about, I mean, they are America's resource. They are our taxpayers' playlands. Mm-hmm. So you go in, there are some rules. There's some things you ask folks to be guided by. But if someone says you want to go out there kayaking, you can't necessarily prohibit them from doing that. You can certainly talk them into what the safe way to be out there.
What do you tell them, Joe? I mean, what do you tell them when they're talking about going out there? They think they know Lake Superior, whether it's the kayak or ice climb or they're snowmobiling along the trails. What do you tell them?
Every single time I tell them, hire a guide.
Yep.
So, it's the business permits here. We have excellent guide services here at the park, and they will keep you safe. And it is worth every penny that you pay them.
Hallelujah.
The kayak guides, the kayak guides have marine band radios. They know how to get help. They call us if you need help. They know how to keep you alive. I was talking before about that kayaker that was having seasickness and went into convulsions due to the waves. And before the Rangers could get there, their guide had already contacted help and got them to a beach and got them to a hospital while we were en route. So, being prepared is one thing, but just, it's worth it hiring a guide that has local knowledge that can keep you safe.
And the other point about that is that those guides have the right kind of equipment because we see people that take off from that beach and they're in wreck boats. They don't have the correct flotation. They don't have a spray skirt. They might not even have a PFD on, a life jacket. So you're absolutely right. And we want to make sure that our listeners, if you're thinking, oh, I'm not going to kayak at Pictured Rocks, please do come kayak at Pictured Rocks. But just as Joe said, go with a guide.
Joe, can people find out more information? I mean, what's a good way for them to find out more about Pictured Rocks and what you guys do there?
I mean, the best place to go is probably our website. There's tons of great information on our government website or any of the social media platforms. So, we've got folks that post stuff on there regularly.
Well, it's been a pleasure having a chat with you today here,
yeah.
Joe. I mean, you've opened my eyes a lot. I mean, I've always understood that the responsibilities of the ranger and how you interact with the public and keeping them safe and keeping them informed. But this has been really a fun chat for me just to kind of hear a little bit more about what you and your crew do over there. And I'd like to say thank you because, I mean, you're dealing, like you said, millions of people a couple of years back and everything like that. And, of course, there's incidents, but there could be a lot more if it wasn't for your crew and yourself to be there. So thank you, man.
Oh, bless you. Bless you, Joe. And be safe and your team be safe, too.
We will. Thank you.
It's Joe Hughes, who is the chief ranger at Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore in Frida. For me personally, I mean, for people that know me, they know I work in the news business in the Marquette area and the UP, and I do a lot of the fire that he was talking about and everything. When that came out, the press release and everything, that was on my newscasts and all of that. But this was a real eye-opening conversation for me because I understand the law enforcement thing. But when Joe alluded to that early on in the interview, it was very interesting to me and how that all ties together because they're truly public safety officers, stewards, and they're there to help keep people that are visiting safe and knowledgeable. I
tell you, I just feel like the capital E on experience, listening to Joe, and that I don't think there's anything that wouldn't shake him. He and his team are prepared for anything, but so many times we forget we have the lake. And then as he explained, the travel into Spray Falls, you're not going to necessarily get lost at Pictured Rocks because if you keep going north, you're eventually going to get to the waterfront, right? Mm-hmm. But you're going to be on the top of a 200-foot cliff. And you're kind of, really using that as your handrail to find if you're going to go toward Munising or Grand Marais. But anybody out there really respecting, if a ranger comes to you and says, I think this is a better idea.
Yeah, don't do this.
Yeah. They want you to have a boatload of fun.
And this is important, too. I want to make sure our listeners understand that, like this particular episode talked a lot about the challenges and rescues and things like that. These are safe locations. The park is safe to visit, and you can do it at your own pace and your own skill level. If you just want to take a Pictured Rocks cruise and check it out from the lake, you can do that. If you want to set foot on the trails and go, you want a snowmobile, you can do it. But it takes preparation and planning because we always talk about the power of Lake Superior and how it is like no other lake. It's not like, you think it's some inland lake or something that you're used to, or even Lake Michigan for that matter, or any of the other Great Lakes. And I think that really kind of came through today. And we want to make sure people know that if you want to visit, look into it and come on by. It's worth it.
And think about that guide. You will just make sure that guided experience is going to take you to the good stuff. And you're going to go home with so many memories, but you're going to go home safe.
Well, again, for those of you that are listening, if you really appreciate this, let us know what you think. You can find us through the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation website or wherever you tuned into this podcast with. Send us some comments, send us some thoughts, and we really do love hearing from you about these episodes that we are doing for you. That was, again, Joe Hughes, the Chief Ranger of Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore along Lake Superior. I'm Walt Lindala.
I'm Frida Waara. Thanks for listening. The National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation, NPLSF, is the only official nonprofit 501c3 fundraising partner of the National Park Service for all 5 U.S. national park sites on Lake Superior.
To learn more about NPLSF projects and programs, you can visit the website at nplsf.org or friend them on Facebook.
I'm Frida Waara.
And I'm Walt Lindala. Thanks for listening to the Lake Superior Podcast.
This podcast made possible with the support of the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation and Media Brew Communications.
This episode brought to you by Cafe Imports, Minneapolis-based importers of fine specialty green coffees. Independently owned and operated since 1993, Cafe Imports has been dedicated to decreasing its impact on the earth through renewable energy, carbon neutrality, and by supporting conservational efforts in places where quality coffee is grown and also where quality coffee is consumed. Where does your coffee come from?
And by the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation. As a nonprofit, we rely on support from listeners like you. If you like what you hear, please consider a donation. To learn more and make a gift, visit us at www.gosuperior.org.